It was a sunny afternoon when 6-year-old Noah Harris disappeared. His father, Jason Harris, watched from the window of their family home as Noah played in the yard, just like any other day. One moment, Noah was there, laughing and running around with his toy cars in hand. The next, he was gone. No screams, no signs of struggle, no footsteps leading anywhere. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed him whole. In the blink of an eye, their world changed forever. No answers, no leads, just the haunting silence of an empty yard. Jason spent years racking his mind with the same devastating question: where did Noah go? Was he kidnapped? Did he run off? The authorities, after months of searching, were stumped. The case grew cold, and the Harris family's hopes dwindled, but Jason never gave up. 8 long years have passed since that fateful day. Jason's life has been a constant search for closure, for answers, for justice. His hope had almost turned to despair, but a shocking discovery is about to bring everything to light. What Jason finds beneath his neighbor's dog kennel will send shockwaves through their quiet town and leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about this case. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to know the truth. And trust me, it's a truth that no one saw coming. You might be wondering, what happened to Noah? How did a child vanish without a trace in broad daylight? And how is it that after all these years, no one has been able to solve this mystery? You've come to the right place because today, we're unraveling one of the most chilling and unexpected twists in a case that has haunted a family for nearly a decade. So, stay with me, because the answers you've been waiting for are just around the corner. By the end of this story, you'll understand why Jason's discovery isn't just the key to Noah's disappearance, it's the key to a much darker secret. Now, let's rewind to that summer day in 2017, a day that was supposed to be like any other. Jason was working from home, his wife, Emma, was in the kitchen preparing lunch, and Noah was outside playing near the fence. They lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing ever really happened. It was the kind of place where kids rode their bikes down the street, where neighbors waved at each other, and everyone knew everyone's name. But in that peaceful, seemingly safe town, a young boy vanished without a trace. And the most disturbing part? No one ever heard from him again. The search for Noah was exhaustive. The police scoured the area, speaking to every neighbor, every person who might have seen something, anything. They went door to door, they checked the surrounding woods, the parks, the abandoned homes near the edge of the town. 4 days, Jason and Emma clung to the hope that their son might still be out there, hiding, scared, lost. But that hope quickly faded into heartbreak. There was no evidence, no witnesses, and no leads. The worst part? The neighbor's dog kennel, a place that seemed completely unrelated to the case, was under suspicion, though no one could explain why. But here's the thing, sometimes the most innocent-looking places hold the darkest secrets. And 8 years later, Jason's relentless search for the truth would lead him to the one place he never thought to look, right under his own nose. And it all started with a peculiar noise coming from beneath his neighbor's dog kennel. A noise that, once heard, could never be unheard. Now, I want you to think about something for a moment. Have you ever felt like something was just off? Like you knew something but couldn't put your finger on it? For Jason, that gut feeling had been eating away at him for years. After Noah's disappearance, he couldn't shake the strange thought that there was more to the story. His instincts told him the truth wasn't out there in the woods or hidden deep in some faraway park, it was closer. Much closer. It all started with a routine visit to his neighbor's house. Jason had known Mark, his neighbor, for years. They weren't close friends, but they were friendly enough. Mark owned a big German Shepherd, a dog that Jason's family had always heard barking from time to time. Nothing unusual about that until one day, Jason noticed that the dog seemed agitated, growling and scratching at the ground near the kennel. Mark didn't seem too concerned, brushing it off as typical dog behavior. But Jason couldn't ignore it. The sound of the dog's nails scraping against the dirt, it felt wrong. It was as though the ground itself was hiding something. Jason couldn't let go of that nagging feeling. So, after weeks of watching the kennel from his own backyard, he decided to confront Mark. What happened next would change everything. In this video, You're going to hear the story from Jason's perspective, how his visit to the neighbor's property led him to uncover a secret that no one could have ever anticipated. You'll hear how he bravely dug beneath the dog kennel, slowly and cautiously, piece by piece, until he uncovered something so shocking that it brought everything into question. Because sometimes, the answers aren't as straightforward as they seem. Sometimes, the truth is buried beneath layers of lies and deceit. As Jason scraped away the dirt and gravel, a chill ran down his spine. The ground was soft, too soft for it to be just dirt. It felt unnatural. And when he hit something solid, something that wasn't supposed to be there, his heart raced. What was it? What had been buried beneath the ground all these years? A simple shovel in the hands of a father desperate for closure would reveal a truth that none of them could have imagined. And that truth would open the door to questions that had been left unanswered for almost a decade. Stay tuned, because the discovery Jason made that day is just the beginning of a story filled with twists, turns, and chilling revelations. The truth about Noah's disappearance was buried under years of silence. But now, we're about to uncover it all. So stick around to the end of the video because you'll want to know exactly what Jason found, and more importantly, why it changes everything we thought we knew about Noah's disappearance. Are you ready for the shocking reveal? Let's dive deeper into the mystery and find out what really happened to young Noah Harris. Keep watching, because the answer you've been waiting for is closer than you think. As Jason began to uncover the unsettling truth beneath the dog kennel, his mind raced. The idea that something so hidden could have been in front of him for all these years was a hard pill to swallow. The neighbor's dog, Mark, had always been an eccentric figure in the neighborhood, quiet, a little aloof, and often seen out back tending to his property. But there was always something off about him, something Jason couldn't quite pinpoint. His reactions when Jason would casually bring up Noah's disappearance always seemed too rehearsed, almost as if he were too calm for someone who lived in the same neighborhood where a child had gone missing. Of course, Jason never thought to question Mark too deeply at the time. After all, everyone had been searching for Noah together, and there was no real reason to think anyone in the small community could be involved. But as Jason stood there, digging through the dirt, every odd interaction, every uncomfortable glance that Mark had given over the years began to resurface in his mind, like puzzle pieces slowly clicking together in a way he never expected. It was easy to dismiss it all at first, but now, everything felt like part of a much larger, more sinister story. It wasn't just the dog kennel anymore, there were too many inconsistencies that couldn't be ignored. When Jason had last seen Mark, a few weeks before, he'd mentioned a trip he was taking to visit family out of state, but there had been no sign of him leaving. Jason didn't think much of it, but now, as he stood in front of Mark's house, he wondered if that had been a cover for something else. Had Mark been around all this time, watching? Even more troubling were the other neighbors. Jason's mind wandered back to the days following Noah's disappearance, when the police had questioned everyone, including the couple next door, the Thompsons. They were a quiet family, but there was something unsettling about them too. Mrs. Thompson had always acted strangely after the incident, as if she were hiding something. She would glance over her shoulder whenever she spoke about Noah, like she feared being overheard. Jason had chalked it up to stress and worry over the event, but now, he couldn't ignore the nagging suspicion that perhaps the Thompsons had known more than they let on. In the weeks following Noah's disappearance, Jason had noticed that their front door remained slightly ajar for hours at a time, and he'd seen their teenage son, Ben, sneaking around the house in a way that seemed oddly out of place. Could there have been a connection between Ben and the disappearance? Could he have been involved in something darker, something that no one had suspected? Jason pushed those thoughts aside, not wanting to entertain the possibility of a family member being involved. The more Jason thought about it, the more questions bubbled to the surface. What was Mark really hiding? Why had he always been so secretive about his backyard, about his dog, and about his strange behavior when the subject of Noah came up? But as the years passed, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was overlooking something critical. Then, there was the timeline. Noah had been playing in the yard at around noon, and the moment Jason looked back outside, he was gone. But what if Noah hadn't just wandered off like everyone initially thought? What if he had been taken? And if so, why hadn't anyone seen anything? The more Jason considered it, the more he became convinced that Noah's disappearance wasn't some random act, it was planned. The strange timing of it, the absolute silence that accompanied Noah's disappearance, it all seemed too deliberate. Jason had never fully bought into the idea that Noah had simply run off. It didn't feel right. And now, with this discovery beneath Mark's dog kennel, that feeling of wrongness had only intensified. What had Noah been caught up in? What had been happening in that quiet little town, behind closed doors, that no one knew about? The local police had initially treated Noah's disappearance like any other missing child case. They followed all the standard protocols, brought in search dogs, and even enlisted the help of a few out-of-town investigators. But as weeks turned into months and the case went cold, the police shifted their focus, treating it less like an urgent search and more like an unfortunate, unsolvable mystery. Jason had spent countless sleepless nights looking over old police reports, questioning every lead, every conversation he had had with the authorities. But there were so many loose ends, so many questions that hadn't been answered. Why had the neighbors been so evasive? Why had the authorities focused their efforts on a different angle, even though Jason felt that they were looking in the wrong places? And most importantly, why had no one thought to investigate the yard, the backyard, or the property of the people living closest to him? For Jason, the discovery under the dog kennel was only the beginning. As he continued to dig, more and more pieces of the puzzle started to fit together, but the picture that was emerging was nothing like he had imagined. Every clue felt like it led to a dead end, every person he thought he could trust now seemed suspect. What if the people he had known all his life, his neighbors, the ones he had waved to on a daily basis, had been hiding something far darker than he ever realized? What if they were all complicit in something horrible, and Noah's disappearance was merely the surface of a much deeper conspiracy? With every new piece of information, Jason felt himself being pulled deeper into a web of secrets and lies that he was only just beginning to unravel. The weight of the situation was becoming unbearable. Every time Jason thought he was getting closer to the truth, another twist would come out of nowhere, pushing him further down a path he didn't want to walk. But he couldn't stop now, not when he was so close to finally uncovering the truth about Noah. And the closer he got, the more he realized that this wasn't just about a missing boy anymore. This was about something far more dangerous, a cover-up that had been years in the making, one that involved more people than Jason had ever thought possible. And with every new revelation, he began to understand just how deep this mystery really went. But even as the pieces started to fall into place, there were still so many unanswered questions. Was Mark really the key to the whole thing, or was he just another piece of the puzzle? Was it possible that Noah had been taken by someone closer to home than Jason could have ever imagined? And, most chilling of all, was there someone still out there watching, waiting, who would do anything to keep the truth buried? Jason had to find out. And he had to find out soon, before the truth slipped further into the shadows, where it could never be uncovered again. Keep watching, because what Jason is about to discover will change everything you thought you knew about Noah's disappearance. The darkest secrets are always the hardest to uncover, but sometimes, the truth is buried just beneath the surface, waiting to be revealed. And when it is, it will leave you questioning everything. Jason's determination to uncover the truth only grew stronger as he continued his search, but with each step forward, he was met with a mounting wall of resistance. It wasn't just that the answers seemed harder to find, it was as if the very world around him was conspiring to keep the truth buried. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came when he returned to the spot beneath Mark's dog kennel. After hours of carefully digging and scraping, Jason had discovered a metal box buried deep beneath the dirt. His heart raced when he realized that it contained something that could finally answer the questions that had tormented him for years. It was an old, tattered journal, covered in mud and grime, but the handwriting on the inside was unmistakable. He was holding a key to understanding Noah's disappearance. Finally, he thought, he was on the verge of something huge. But when Jason returned to the site the following day, the box was gone. All that remained were disturbed piles of dirt and the faintest traces of where he had been digging. His stomach sank. Who could have taken it? He had been so careful to cover his tracks, to keep everything hidden, yet someone had managed to undo everything in a matter of hours. The thought of someone else digging into the very spot where he had just uncovered the journal made him shiver. This wasn't just a coincidence. Whoever had been watching him was now actively working to prevent him from finding the truth. The feeling that he was being followed, watched, and possibly manipulated took on a more sinister tone. Someone knew what he had found, and they were trying to make sure it never saw the light of day. It wasn't just the disappearance of the evidence that left Jason unsettled. There were people, too, who seemed determined to steer him away from his investigation. His old friend, Detective Rachel Miller, had been a trusted ally in the early days of Noah's disappearance. Rachel had always been more than just a law enforcement officer to Jason. She had been a confidant, someone he could trust in a world that had grown increasingly uncertain. But recently, her behavior had shifted. She seemed distant, her phone calls curt, her responses to his questions guarded. When Jason reached out to her, asking for help, she was quick to remind him that the case had long since gone cold and that he needed to move on. But Jason didn't buy it. Rachel had never been one to back down from a mystery, especially one as personal as this. So why was she pushing him away now? Was she protecting someone? Or was she afraid of what he might uncover? The more Jason pressed her, the more he felt the tension between them. Something was off, and Rachel wasn't the ally he once thought she was. But it wasn't just Rachel's sudden coldness that threw Jason off. He received an anonymous message, a chilling warning that sent a jolt of fear through him. The note was short and simple: "Stop digging. You're getting too close to the truth." It was typed, not handwritten, which made it even more unsettling. How did they know he was looking beneath the dog kennel? How had they known that he had already made a discovery? There was no return address, no clue as to who had sent it, but the message was clear: someone didn't want him to continue. Jason's heart pounded as he reread the words over and over. Was this a threat from a neighbor, someone who knew too much about his investigation? Or was there someone with a darker agenda at play, someone with more power than he could ever have imagined? Jason knew one thing for certain: he couldn't stop now. He had come too far, uncovered too much, and the answers he was searching for were just within his reach. But the deeper he dug, the more he realized that the people around him weren't what they appeared to be. There was a conspiracy at play, one that involved not just his neighbors, but possibly even the very people he had trusted the most. And as the walls began to close in around him, Jason began to question whether he could trust anyone anymore. One night, after receiving the warning, Jason decided to meet with a new ally he had made during his search: Paul, a local historian who had helped him uncover old records from the town's past. Paul had been more than willing to assist Jason, offering old newspapers and documents that might shed light on the history of the area. But when Jason met him at a small, dimly lit cafe, something about their conversation didn't sit right. Paul seemed on edge, constantly looking over his shoulder, his eyes darting nervously as though someone might be listening. Jason tried to keep the conversation casual, asking about his research, but Paul's answers grew increasingly evasive. When Jason mentioned the journal he had found, Paul's demeanor shifted immediately. He leaned in closer, his voice low and urgent. "You need to stop," he whispered, his breath catching in his throat. "There are things you don't know, things that no one should ever know." Paul's warning sounded like a plea, but Jason couldn't tell if it was out of genuine concern or fear. Was Paul trying to protect him from something, or was he trying to keep Jason from digging any deeper into a secret he knew all too well? Jason's instincts told him to walk away, to drop the investigation before it consumed him. But every time he considered quitting, the memory of Noah, his son, his flesh and blood, kept him going. The image of that empty yard, the silence after Noah vanished, haunted him day and night. He couldn't stop now. He wouldn't stop. The truth was just out of reach, and he wasn't about to let fear, threats, or warnings keep him from finally uncovering it. But as Jason sat alone in the cafe, staring into his cup of coffee, something unsettling happened. His phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Hesitant, but desperate for any clue, Jason answered. The voice on the other end was muffled, distorted, like someone was trying to hide their identity. "You're getting too close," the voice said. "Stop now, or the next thing you uncover will be your own grave." The line went dead before Jason could respond. That was the moment Jason realized that the stakes were much higher than he ever imagined. Someone was watching his every move. Someone with the power to make him disappear, just like Noah. Was this the end of his search, or the beginning of something even darker? Jason's mind raced as he stood up, determined not to back down, but with a sinking feeling that the truth was slipping away, slipping through his fingers like sand. What had started as a search for a missing child had become a dangerous game, one where Jason wasn't sure who the real enemy was anymore. The closer he got, the more the shadows closed in around him, and the more Jason wondered, was the truth even worth the price he would have to pay to uncover it? What Jason didn't realize was that someone very close to him was playing a game of their own, and the next move would change everything. As Jason sat alone in his dimly lit office, his mind was clouded with uncertainty. The threat on the phone, the warnings from Paul, and the missing journal, everything was beginning to feel like a tangled web of deceit, but the one thing that still drove him forward was his unshakable belief that Noah was out there somewhere, that the truth had to be out there waiting for him to uncover it. But it wasn't just Jason who was being dragged into this escalating nightmare. The people closest to him were now becoming targets too, and that's when things took a darker turn. His wife, Emma, had always been his rock. Despite the grief and uncertainty they had both lived through, Emma had held their family together. But as Jason became more consumed by the mystery surrounding Noah's disappearance, Emma began to change, and it wasn't the kind of change Jason could ignore. It was subtle at first, little things, like her increasing distance from him, her reluctance to talk about the past, or how she would suddenly grow quiet when Jason mentioned the investigation. Emma, who had been so supportive when the search first began, now seemed almost evasive, as though she was hiding something. Jason brushed it off, attributing it to the years of unresolved grief and the toll the investigation had taken on their marriage. But that all changed the night Emma came home with a look in her eyes that Jason knew all too well. It was the same look he had seen in the eyes of people who had been confronted with a truth too terrible to face. The evening had been quiet, nothing out of the ordinary, until Emma's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her eyes narrowing slightly before she tucked the phone into her purse, as if trying to hide the message from Jason. He didn't mention it at first, but when he walked into the living room later, he noticed her phone was on the table, face down. Without thinking, Jason picked it up and, almost instinctively, opened her text messages. What he saw made his stomach drop. The message wasn't from someone she knew well. It was anonymous, just like the one Jason had received earlier that day, but this time, the message was far more personal. Stop digging. We know what you're doing. You're being watched. You're too close to the truth. Keep pushing, and you'll lose everything. Jason froze. His pulse raced as he stared at the screen, processing what he had just read. The threat wasn't just about him anymore, they were threatening his family, his wife. Emma had been involved in this somehow, whether she was aware of it or not. He turned to her, his voice barely a whisper. Emma, what's going on? Who sent this? She looked at him for a moment, then turned away, her eyes welling up with tears. Jason, I don't know. I swear I don't know. I've been trying to protect you. From all of this, from the past. Her voice quivered, and Jason's heart sank. What was she hiding? What had she known about Noah's disappearance that she hadn't told him? The look on her face was a mixture of fear and guilt, and that was all Jason needed to know. There was something about this entire situation that was much bigger than he had ever imagined, and Emma, the person he loved most in the world, seemed to be involved in ways he couldn't even begin to comprehend. With no answers, Jason's mind began to spiral. He needed to talk to Emma, to understand what was going on, but at that moment, everything felt like a maze with no way out. Just as he was about to ask her again, the phone rang. It was an unknown number, and for a brief second, he wondered if it was the same person who had threatened him earlier. His hand trembled as he answered the call, but it wasn't the voice of the mysterious caller he had feared. Instead, it was Rachel. Jason's heart leaped, and he immediately braced for another cold conversation, another attempt to steer him away from the investigation. But Rachel's voice was different this time, urgent, frantic, as if she had just been through something traumatic. Jason, you need to listen to me. You're in danger. You and your family. I can't say much, but there are people in this town, people you think you can trust, who have been hiding the truth. The whole time. It's not just Noah you need to be looking for. Her voice cracked as she continued. I don't know who's behind it, but the deeper you dig, the more you'll realize that this is bigger than you thought. They've been covering it up for years, and if you don't stop now, they'll come for you. For all of you. Jason's head spun. His heart pounded in his chest as he processed Rachel's cryptic warning. Was she trying to help him, or was she leading him down a dangerous path? Was she scared of something, someone? And what did she mean by "it's not just Noah you need to be looking for"? What else was there? As Jason hung up the phone, his thoughts were swirling. What could Rachel have meant? What had she discovered that she wasn't telling him? And why now, after all these years, was she suddenly so willing to speak up? She wasn't a person to be easily intimidated, so the fear in her voice was a signal that something truly terrifying was unfolding. Had she learned something that Jason was still too blind to see? That night, while Jason tossed and turned in bed, unable to shake the unease gnawing at him, Emma stayed awake too. He could feel her restless movements beside him, her breath shallow and quick, like she was trapped in a nightmare of her own making. She hadn't spoken much since their conversation, but Jason could sense the guilt she was carrying. Something was weighing on her, something that tied her to the mystery of Noah's disappearance, and no matter how much she tried to shield him from it, Jason knew deep down that he couldn't escape the truth forever. Then, as he drifted in and out of sleep, a final, chilling thought struck him. What if the person behind these threats wasn't someone from outside the town? What if the person who had been manipulating everyone, including Emma, was someone who had been right there beside him the whole time? The next day, Jason knew he couldn't wait any longer. He had to confront Emma, had to find out what she knew, and if Rachel was telling the truth, he had to expose the conspiracy that had haunted him for so long. But just as he was about to approach her, another message arrived, this time, on his own phone. The message was a single photo, grainy but unmistakable. It was a picture of his house, taken from a distance, and standing in the front yard was someone Jason knew all too well. The unmistakable figure of Mark, the neighbor he had begun to suspect. But the image was more than just a photo, it was a warning, one that left Jason questioning not only the people around him but his very own safety. Now, with the stakes higher than ever, Jason knew he had no choice but to face the growing storm head-on. But with the truth slipping further from his grasp, and everyone around him seemingly hiding something, he began to wonder, was the person he thought was the key to it all actually the one pulling the strings from the shadows? The questions kept coming, and the answers kept slipping further out of reach. The deeper Jason dug, the more it became clear, this was just the beginning. The air was thick with tension, the kind that seemed to press down on Jason's chest every time he took a breath. It had been days since the photo of Mark in his front yard had appeared on his phone, and Jason couldn't shake the unsettling thought that someone was always watching him, always one step ahead. The feeling of being followed had become a constant presence, like a shadow trailing behind him, just out of sight. Every time he stepped outside, he scanned the street, his eyes darting to every corner, every car that passed by. He couldn't trust anything anymore, not even the people closest to him. His mind was consumed by paranoia, and his sleep was filled with nightmares of dark figures lurking in the shadows, waiting for the moment to strike. It was only a matter of time before the truth caught up with him, and when it did, he feared that he wouldn't be prepared for what was waiting. It was late one evening when the feeling of dread reached its breaking point. Emma had gone out to visit a friend, she'd mentioned it casually, but Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The atmosphere in the house felt wrong, too quiet, too still. As if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. Jason paced the living room, trying to keep his thoughts clear, but they kept spiraling. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows, felt like a signal, an omen of something sinister closing in on him. He couldn't focus on anything, his thoughts racing between the cryptic warnings, the missing journal, and the strange, lingering presence that had begun to haunt his every waking moment. Then, as if in answer to his fears, there was a sharp knock at the door. Jason's heart skipped a beat as he walked cautiously to answer it, half expecting to find someone standing there, someone who had come to finally deliver the truth, or perhaps something much worse. But when he opened the door, there was no one. The night was silent, eerily so. His first instinct was to close the door and walk away, but as he stepped back inside, something caught his eye, a small, folded note, placed neatly on the doorstep, as though someone had been waiting for him to find it. His pulse quickened as he reached down to pick it up, the paper feeling cold and brittle in his hands. He unfolded it carefully, and his stomach twisted when he read the message. "You're running out of time." If you don't stop looking, we'll make sure the next person to disappear is someone you love." The words were clear, deliberate, a threat wrapped in an unmistakable warning. Jason's mind raced as he thought of Emma. She had gone out earlier, and he couldn't shake the fear that the person who had left this note had something to do with her disappearance. He tried to push the thought away, telling himself it was just his paranoia, that he was overreacting. But deep down, he knew he couldn't ignore the possibility that someone was already inside his home, that the danger was closer than he ever realized. Every instinct in him screamed that he needed to find Emma, to make sure she was safe, but his legs felt like they were made of lead, and his hands were trembling so badly that he had to grip the doorframe for support. With a burst of energy, Jason grabbed his coat and rushed outside, his heart pounding in his chest as he scanned the quiet street. There was no sign of Emma's car in the driveway, no sign of her anywhere. Panic surged through him, and for the first time, he realized just how much danger he was really in. It wasn't just the mysterious threats, the warnings, or the cryptic messages. It was the people behind them, whoever they were, who had already shown they were capable of much worse. And now, with Emma gone, he had no idea where to turn. He called her phone again, but there was no answer. The ringing tone felt endless, a constant reminder that she was somewhere out there, lost, and that he was helpless to find her. His mind was racing, each possibility darker than the last. Had they taken her? Was she being used to get to him? Was she part of whatever this twisted game had become? He couldn't trust anyone anymore, not even her, and that realization cut deeper than any threat. The woman he loved, the one person who had been his anchor through all of this, might be involved in ways that Jason couldn't yet understand. His thoughts were interrupted by a muffled noise, footsteps behind him. He spun around, his heart in his throat, but no one was there. The street was empty as it had been moments before. Jason's breath caught in his throat, and his mind screamed at him to run, to get out of there, but his feet were frozen to the ground. For a long moment, he stood there, alone, his gaze darting around, waiting for anything to happen. It was like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the moment when everything would unravel. Then, just as Jason was about to turn back into the house, he heard it. A faint rustling sound coming from the side of the house. He moved closer, his heart pounding in his chest, every nerve on edge, his body screaming for him to stop, to turn away. But he couldn't. Something was pulling him forward, something that felt like the edge of a cliff, and he was teetering dangerously close to falling off. He rounded the corner, and there, in the shadows, he saw it. Emma's phone, lying in the grass. The screen was cracked, the glass shattered in a way that made his stomach lurch. It was a cruel sign, an unmistakable message that something had gone terribly wrong. Jason dropped to his knees, his hands shaking as he picked up the phone. He knew what he had to do next, but the thought of it made his chest tighten with fear. He needed to call the police, needed to tell them what had happened, what he had uncovered, but as he held the phone to his ear, a sharp, cold voice crackled through the receiver. "I told you to stop. Now, you'll suffer the consequences. It's too late to turn back now. And as for Emma, she's just the beginning." The line went dead, and Jason's blood ran cold. His worst fears had just been realized. This wasn't just a warning anymore, it was a declaration of war. They were playing with him, pulling strings, making him dance on their terms. And as the silence of the night closed in around him, Jason realized that everything he had thought he understood was a lie. He wasn't just investigating a disappearance anymore. He was in the middle of something much darker, something that would stop at nothing to protect its secrets. The feeling of being hunted was no longer just in his mind. It was real. And it was coming for him. Jason's mind was a storm of confusion and terror, the silence that had settled over him like a suffocating blanket. He stared at the broken phone in his hands, each second feeling like an eternity. The call had shaken him to the core. Emma was gone, and the twisted message he'd just received made it clear that whatever had happened to her, whatever game he had been pulled into, was far more sinister than he'd ever imagined. His heart raced as he tried to piece together what he'd learned, but the more he thought, the more everything felt like a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit. His thoughts kept returning to the person who had once been his closest ally, Paul. Jason had trusted Paul completely, even when the man had seemed distant and distracted during the past few weeks. He had always believed that Paul was just dealing with his own demons, his own way of coping with the events surrounding Noah's disappearance. But now, everything was clouded by doubt. Had Paul been a part of this from the beginning? Had he known more about what was happening to Jason and his family than he had ever let on? Was he hiding something much darker than Jason had been willing to believe? It was the middle of the night when Jason's phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't an anonymous threat, but a name, Paul's name. Jason's pulse quickened as he stared at the message. It was a simple line, but it hit him like a brick to the chest. Meet me at the old barn on Millers Road. It's time you knew the truth. Don't tell anyone. Trust no one. His mind screamed at him to run, to call the authorities and let them handle it. But part of him that he hated, was desperate for answers. What did Paul know? Why had he sent that message? And why did it feel like the entire world was closing in on him, pulling him deeper into a mystery that seemed to shift with every new clue, every new twist? Jason drove through the night, the headlights of his car slicing through the darkness, the tension in his chest building with every passing mile. The old barn on Millers Road was a place he hadn't thought about in years. It had been abandoned long before Noah disappeared, a relic of the past that everyone had long since forgotten. As he pulled up, the barn loomed ahead, its dilapidated frame casting long, eerie shadows. The area was isolated, far from the nearest neighbor, and the stillness was unsettling. No one would hear him scream here, if it came to that. As Jason stepped out of his car, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Something wasn't right. The air felt thick, heavy with an almost palpable sense of dread. He approached the barn cautiously, every instinct telling him to turn back. But he couldn't. Not now. Not when he was so close to finding out the truth. The barn door creaked as he pushed it open, the sound echoing in the empty space. Inside, the dim light from his phone illuminated the dusty, forgotten remnants of a place that had seen better days. And then, in the far corner of the barn, Jason saw him, Paul. But Paul wasn't alone. Standing beside him, in the shadows, was someone Jason hadn't expected to see. Someone he hadn't even considered. It was Mark, the neighbor. The same Mark who had been the subject of Jason's suspicions for weeks. The same man who had been watching him, lurking in the background, a constant presence in the story that Jason had been unraveling. But why was he here, with Paul? And why had Paul brought him to this place, in the dead of night, under such strange and ominous circumstances? Jason, Paul's voice was strained, his face drawn, as if the weight of something terrible was crushing him. I know you have a lot of questions. I know you're scared, but you need to hear me out. We're all in this together. What's been happening, it's bigger than anything you can imagine. Jason's mind was spinning. His pulse thundered in his ears, and for a moment, he couldn't move, couldn't speak. It was as though his body was frozen in place, caught in a nightmare that he couldn't wake from. Mark stepped forward, his eyes wide, almost apologetic, but there was something in them, a shadow, that made Jason take a step back. I don't know how to explain this, but, Paul began, his voice trembling, Noah's disappearance wasn't random. It wasn't some accident. It was planned. And I've been part of it from the beginning. Jason's throat went dry. What are you talking about? He demanded, his voice barely more than a whisper, disbelief and anger warring within him. You were supposed to be helping me find Noah, not part of some conspiracy. Paul's eyes dropped to the ground, guilt written all over his face. I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt you. But this is the only way it could happen. It was the only way to protect you. Protect me. Jason's heart was hammering in his chest. Protect me from what? Paul swallowed hard, his face pale. It's not just about Noah. The disappearance, it was part of something much bigger. A network. A group of people who, he stopped abruptly, as if realizing he had said too much. The words hung in the air, charged with an electric tension. You need to understand, Jason, there's a reason they're after you. There's a reason they want you to stop digging. Jason was breathless, his mind racing with 100 questions, none of which made sense. What group? Who are you working for, Paul? What the hell is going on? That's the part you don't understand, Paul said quietly, his voice barely audible over the silence of the barn. "I didn't have a choice. None of us did. The people you think are your enemies, they're the ones who've been controlling this whole thing. But it's not just about Noah. It's about everything. About everything that's been hidden in this town for decades." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating Jason's ability to think clearly. And then Mark spoke, his voice low and dark, as if he was finally ready to reveal something long buried. "You've been following the wrong trail, Jason. All this time, you've been chasing ghosts. The truth is right in front of you, but you've been too blinded by your own anger to see it. You want to know what happened to Noah? You want to know why they're after you? It's because you're part of the story. You always have been." Jason's breath caught in his throat. His mind reeled. Part of the story? What did that even mean? His legs began to feel weak, and he had to steady himself against the splintered wood of the barn wall. His whole world had just shifted, and everything he thought he knew, every truth he had built his search on, was crumbling before him. What had Paul meant? What had Mark meant? The pieces that had once seemed to fit so neatly together now felt like shards of glass, fractured and dangerous. And as Jason stood there, in that dark, forgotten barn, he realized the horrifying truth. He wasn't just a victim in this twisted game. He was a pawn, one of many in a much darker, much larger plot than he had ever imagined. And now, no matter how hard he fought to escape, the game was only just beginning. Jason stood in the dimly lit barn, the weight of Paul and Mark's revelations crashing over him like an overwhelming tide. The ground beneath his feet felt unstable, as though the very foundation of his reality was beginning to crumble. His mind raced, the truth he thought he understood twisting and warping in ways that defied logic. He wanted to shout, to demand answers, but the silence that had fallen between them felt suffocating, a heavy curtain of dread that pressed on him from all sides. Mark's words echoed in his mind, each one more damning than the last. "You're part of the story. You always have been." But what story? What had he been a part of, and how had he missed it all this time? He wanted to run, to escape this nightmare, but there was nowhere to go. The darkness of the barn, the eerily still night outside, and the unblinking eyes of the men standing before him trapped him in place. And just when he thought he might be able to gather his thoughts, Paul's voice broke the tension, pulling him back into the chaos of the moment. "You need to understand, Jason," Paul said, his voice cracking with an emotion Jason couldn't place. "I never wanted to drag you into this. I never wanted you to get involved. But the truth is, you've been living in a lie your entire life. What you thought was normal, what you thought was your reality, it's all been orchestrated. They've been watching you, watching all of us. And now that you're close to finding out, they'll stop at nothing to silence you." Jason's breath hitched, his pulse quickening. "Stop at nothing? What do you mean by that? You're telling me that my life, everything I've ever known, is a lie?" Paul looked away, his face tense with guilt and fear. "I know it's hard to understand, but that's the truth. And you've got to make a decision. You can either walk away from all of this and try to forget, or you can dig deeper, and risk losing everything and everyone." Jason's mind reeled at the enormity of what Paul was saying. Walk away? Could he really do that? Could he turn his back on the search for Noah, on the countless questions he'd spent years trying to answer? The thought of abandoning his search felt like a betrayal, not just to Noah, but to his own sanity. He'd spent so long piecing together a truth that made sense to him, a truth that gave him hope. Now, that very hope felt like it was slipping through his fingers, like sand he couldn't hold on to no matter how hard he tried. But it wasn't just the truth of Noah's disappearance that was at stake anymore. It was his own life, and the lives of those he loved. Jason's mind went back to Emma. She was gone, and he couldn't shake the fear that whatever had happened to her was directly tied to the conspiracy Paul was talking about. He could almost hear her voice, see her face, begging him to come to her rescue. His gut twisted with the realization that he might not have time to save her, that if he didn't act now, it might be too late. Suddenly, Mark stepped forward, his face tight with something Jason couldn't quite identify. "Paul's right," he said, his voice low. "This is bigger than you think, Jason. They've already made their move. You need to decide whether you're going to fight back, or let them win." Jason's mind spun, the weight of his choices pressing down on him like an unbearable force. But Mark wasn't done. You have to understand something else. If you keep pushing, if you keep digging, they're going to target everyone you care about. Your family, your friends, they'll all be in danger. They've already started with Emma. If you keep going, you're signing their death warrant. Jason's heart stopped. The words hung in the air like poison, and for a moment, he felt like he couldn't breathe. They'd already targeted Emma. It was one thing to be a victim of this twisted conspiracy, but to know that someone he loved was in immediate danger because of his search, it was a weight Jason wasn't sure he could bear. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" he demanded, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and desperation. "Why didn't you warn me, Paul? Why did you let me walk right into this?" Paul's face hardened. "Because I didn't have a choice. I couldn't tell you. I couldn't let you know what I knew, or it would have been over for all of us. I thought I could protect you." But now, his voice trailed off, and for the first time, Jason saw the true extent of the fear in his eyes. "Now, I don't know how to fix this. We're in too deep." Jason's world spun. The walls of the barn seemed to close in around him, the weight of the choices before him nearly suffocating. He could feel the desperation clawing at him, the urge to push through, to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. But the cold reality was staring him in the face. Every answer, every step forward, seemed to come with a price. And the cost was more than he was willing to pay. Suddenly, a voice broke through the chaos in his mind. It wasn't Paul or Mark, but someone else, someone Jason hadn't seen in weeks, someone who had been strangely absent from all of this, someone he had trusted above all others. "Jason," Emma's voice was a faint whisper, and for a moment, Jason wondered if he was imagining it. But then, through the haze of his thoughts, he heard it again, clear and unmistakable. "Jason, it's me. I don't have much time." His heart pounded in his chest as he turned to face the direction of the voice, panic surging through him. Emma. Was she here? Was she alive? Was this some sort of twisted joke? But when he reached for his phone, the message he saw made his stomach drop. It wasn't Emma's voice he had heard. It was a recorded message, one that had been sent to his phone just minutes before he'd come to the barn. "You don't know who to trust anymore, do you, Jason? You never did. The truth is closer than you think, but the cost is too high. Choose wisely." The words were like a dagger to his chest. Everything he thought he understood was being turned on its head. And then, another message popped up, one that made his blood run cold. "If you don't make the right choice, Emma won't make it through the night." Jason's hands trembled as he held the phone, the reality of what he was being asked to do settling in. He had two choices, both equally devastating. He could walk away, let everything go, and hope that Emma would be safe. Or, he could keep fighting, keep digging, and risk losing her forever. The stakes were higher than ever before, and Jason had never felt so powerless. In that moment, everything Jason believed in, everything he thought he stood for, seemed to dissolve into thin air. The line between good and evil, right and wrong, was blurred beyond recognition. The question now wasn't just about finding Noah, or exposing the truth, it was about his very survival. And the survival of those he loved. Could he sacrifice the one thing that had kept him going, the truth, to save her? The choices were impossible. The clock was ticking. And the darkness that had been closing in on him was now all around him. The weight of the decision pressed on Jason like an unbearable force, suffocating every breath he took. The message on his phone blinked back at him with a chilling reminder: Emma's life hung in the balance, and no matter what path he chose, he was on the brink of losing something or someone. His mind was in overdrive, torn between desperation and the gut-wrenching fear that any move he made could be his last. He was trapped in a game that was far bigger than he ever imagined, and the rules had shifted in ways he couldn't predict. But as he stared into the darkness of the barn, the truth began to unfurl in his mind, piece by piece, with terrifying clarity. What if the conspiracy wasn't just about him and Emma? What if it extended far beyond the small circle of people he knew? He turned to face Paul and Mark, his heart pounding in his chest. "This isn't just about Noah anymore, is it?" Jason's voice was strained, thick with the weight of the realization that had begun to settle over him. "This isn't just about Emma either. This is bigger. You've been using me, haven't you? All this time, you've been pulling the strings, feeding me breadcrumbs so I'd keep looking in the wrong direction. Paul flinched at the accusation, his face pale, but there was no denying the truth in Jason's words. Jason, but Paul didn't get a chance to finish. Mark stepped forward, cutting him off with an air of finality. Paul's right about one thing, Mark said, his voice cold, distant. This has always been bigger than you, Jason. Bigger than Noah. Bigger than Emma. You've been playing the part you were meant to play, and now you're getting too close to the truth. Too close to the core of everything. Jason's stomach dropped. Core of what? What are you talking about? Mark's eyes flickered with something anger, maybe regret, maybe fear. He was a man who had been caught in his own lies, and Jason saw it now more clearly than ever before. The group, Mark said, almost in a whisper, as if speaking the name aloud would somehow change the rules of the game. The ones who've been controlling everything, pulling the strings from the shadows. They've been here for decades, running things from behind the scenes. The disappearance of Noah, Emma's abduction, it's all part of something much darker than you can imagine. Jason felt his legs tremble beneath him, the ground seeming to shift underfoot as the truth collided with his brain. So, all of this was orchestrated? From the beginning? Mark's gaze hardened. You weren't the only one they've been watching, Jason. They've been watching all of us. They're everywhere, connected, intertwined with every institution, every authority in this town. They have the power to erase anyone who gets too close. And now, you're that person. You've been pushing too hard, and they're already moving against you. Jason's pulse raced. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. All this time, he had been a pawn in a game that had been set in motion long before his son disappeared, long before he ever stepped into this nightmare. And now, they were closing in on him, tightening the noose. Who are they? Jason demanded, his voice rising with a mix of disbelief and rage. Why are they doing this? Mark didn't answer right away, his eyes darting to Paul, who looked away, unwilling to meet Jason's gaze. It was then that Jason understood, Paul wasn't just complicit in this conspiracy. He was a part of it. He had been working with them, hiding the truth, playing the role of an ally to keep Jason from getting too close to the heart of it all. Jason's heart pounded in his chest as the betrayal settled in like a knife wound. He had trusted Paul with everything, he had believed in him, even when the clues pointed in the wrong direction. But now, the mask had fallen away, and the truth was as ugly and unforgiving as he had feared. You were part of it the whole time, Jason said, his voice low, trembling with hurt and anger. You knew about the group. You knew what they were doing. And you let me chase my own tail, all while feeding me lies. Paul's face crumpled with regret, but his words were firm. I didn't want this. I didn't want any of this. But they control everything, Jason. They control the money, the power, the very fabric of this town. And they've been using us, using me, for years. I tried to get out, but they don't let you leave once you're in. Jason's mind reeled. He had been so focused on finding Noah, on uncovering the truth about his son's disappearance, that he had never considered the possibility that the conspiracy was so vast, so entrenched. It wasn't just about his family. It wasn't just about a few people in his life being targeted, it was about an entire system of corruption and control that reached into every corner of his world. And suddenly, everything made sense in a terrifying way. The strange occurrences, the people who had gone missing, the walls of silence that had surrounded him at every turn, they were all connected. The truth had been right in front of him all along, but he had been too caught up in the search for Noah to see it. This wasn't just about the disappearance of a child. This was about a vast network, a dark power that had its hands in everything, from politics to law enforcement, from businesses to families. The conspiracy was so deep, so well hidden, that Jason had barely scratched the surface. And now, the walls were closing in. But that wasn't the worst of it. As the pieces began to fall into place, Jason realized something even more horrifying. They weren't just targeting him anymore. They were targeting everyone. They're not just after me, are they? Jason asked quietly, his voice trembling with the realization. They've been after everyone I've cared about. They've been using me to cover their tracks, to keep me distracted while they hurt the people I love. Paul's face was grim, his words like acid. Yes. They've been doing this for decades. People come and go, disappear without a trace, and the world just moves on. It's all part of their plan. Jason's breath caught in his throat. The betrayal stung like a fresh wound, but it was the knowledge that he had been used, manipulated like a chess piece in a game too big for him to comprehend, that sent him into a tailspin of rage. They had played him for a fool, and now they were playing for keeps. Before Jason could process the enormity of what he was hearing, the phone in his pocket buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a cryptic message or a warning, it was a call, an incoming number he didn't recognize. His heart skipped as he answered it without thinking. Jason, the voice on the other end was familiar, yet cold. It sent a shiver down his spine. "You're running out of time." It was Emma. Her voice was shaky, distorted by static, but the message was clear. "You need to stop. You need to stop digging. If you don't, everything you love will be gone. They're already here. They've already started." The line went dead. Jason's blood ran cold. His pulse thundered in his ears. The stakes had never been higher. The game had changed, and everything he thought he knew about the world, about the people around him, was crumbling. He was in too deep now to back out. The conspiracy was everywhere, too vast, too pervasive, and Jason realized he was the only one left who could stop it. But at what cost? As the reality of the choices before him set in, Jason understood there was no turning back. The darkness had spread too far, and there was no escaping it now. He had to face the truth, no matter how terrifying it was. And if it meant risking everything, even his own life, he would do whatever it took to save those he loved. But in the back of his mind, one chilling thought repeated over and over: was it too late to save them at all? Jason stood in the abandoned warehouse, the air thick with tension and the acrid scent of rust and decay. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat a reminder of the perilous path he had chosen. The dim light from a single flickering bulb cast long shadows, distorting the familiar surroundings into something unrecognizable, as if the very walls were closing in on him. He had come here seeking answers, but what he found instead was a labyrinth of deceit, betrayal, and a conspiracy that reached deeper than he ever imagined. The door creaked open behind him, and he spun around, his breath catching in his throat. Standing in the doorway was Emma, her face pale, eyes wide with fear. She stepped forward hesitantly, her movements slow and deliberate, as if every step was a battle against an unseen force. Jason's mind raced. Was she real? Or was this another trick, another layer of the web they had spun around him? "Jason," Emma's voice was barely a whisper, trembling with emotion. "You have to stop. You don't know what you're dealing with." He took a step toward her, his hand reaching out instinctively, but she flinched, taking a step back. "Please," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "You don't understand. They're watching. They're always watching." Jason's mind reeled. Who was she warning him about? Who were they? And why had she been silent all this time? The questions swirled in his mind, each one more urgent than the last. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse, sharp and deliberate. Jason turned toward the noise, his heart skipping a beat. From the shadows emerged Mark, his expression unreadable, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Jason," Mark said, his voice calm but firm. "You need to listen. It's not what you think." Jason's eyes narrowed. "Not what I think." "Then tell me, Mark. Tell me what's really going on." Mark stepped closer, lowering his hands. "You're not the first to uncover the truth," he said quietly. "Others have tried before you. But they didn't make it. They were silenced." Jason's stomach churned. Silenced? By who? Mark hesitated, glancing at Emma, who stood silently, her eyes downcast. "By the organization," he said finally. "The ones who control everything. They orchestrated Noah's disappearance. They orchestrated everything." Jason's breath caught in his throat. "Noah! You knew. You knew all along." Mark nodded slowly. "I tried to protect you. I tried to keep you away from this. But you kept digging. You kept getting closer." Jason's mind raced. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was one he couldn't comprehend. Why? Why would they do this? Mark's gaze hardened. Power. Control. Fear. They manipulate events, people, lives, to maintain their grip on everything. And now, they're coming for you. Jason's pulse quickened. What do you mean, coming for me? Before Mark could respond, a sharp click echoed through the warehouse. Jason turned just in time to see a figure step into the dim light, a man in a dark suit, his face obscured by the brim of a hat. That's enough, the man said, his voice cold and authoritative. Jason's heart skipped a beat. Who are you? The man stepped forward, his movements deliberate. I am someone who ensures that certain truths remain buried, he said, his eyes locking onto Jason's. And you, Jason, have unearthed one too many. Jason's mind raced. This was it. The moment he had feared. The confrontation. The reckoning. You think you can stop me? Jason's voice was steady, though his insides churned with fear and adrenaline. You think you can silence me? The man smiled, a cold, calculating smile. I don't need to silence you, Jason. You're already too deep. You're already compromised. Jason's confusion deepened. Compromised? What are you talking about? The man stepped closer, his presence imposing. You were never meant to uncover the truth. You were never meant to find out. But now that you have, there's no going back. Jason's mind reeled. What was he saying? What did he mean? Suddenly, the man reached into his coat and pulled out a small device, pressing a button. A low hum filled the air, and the lights in the warehouse flickered and dimmed. What's happening? Jason demanded, his voice rising. The man didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked toward the shadows, disappearing into the darkness. Jason stood frozen, his mind racing, heart pounding. What had just happened? What had he uncovered? And more importantly, what was he going to do now? He turned to Mark and Emma, seeking answers, but they were gone. The warehouse was empty, silent, as if they had never been there at all. Jason's breath came in shallow gasps. Was it all a hallucination? A trick of the mind? Or had he truly uncovered something so dangerous that it had erased his allies from existence? He stumbled forward, his legs weak, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. The truth was out there. He knew it. But now, he was alone. Alone in a world that had turned against him. And as he stepped into the darkness, the weight of his choices pressing down on him, one thought echoed in his mind. Had he made the right decision? The first morning light streamed in through the cracked window of Jason's old farmhouse, bathing the dust-covered floorboards in a dull, golden haze. Everything was still. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees like a memory, and for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like a threat, it felt like a pause, a breath before the next chapter. Jason sat at the edge of the porch, the weight of what he'd been through etched deep into the lines around his eyes. His body was still sore, his mind still clouded with echoes of everything he'd uncovered, but in a strange, unspoken way, he felt the faint flicker of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in nearly a decade. Peace. It was fragile and fleeting, but it was there, real enough to hold onto if only for a moment. He had answers now, even if those answers came wrapped in horror and grief. He knew what had happened to Noah. His son hadn't simply vanished that day in the yard. He had been taken not just by a single monster, but by a system of manipulation, control, and fear so vast that it had swallowed entire families, generations, and communities without anyone daring to speak its name. The underground network that had operated beneath their noses for years had finally been exposed, at least in part, and Jason had played a bigger role than he ever expected. He was the unwitting pawn who became the one man too broken to stop fighting, too haunted to look away. His relentless pursuit of the truth had shaken something loose in that dark world, and though many pieces still remained hidden, the cracks had started to show. Emma had been rescued, or at least, she was alive. Her eyes told stories she wasn't ready to say out loud yet, and her silence was a heavy thing Jason carried with him. But she was there, safe for now, and that alone was something sacred. Mark had vanished again, his loyalty and betrayal still tangled in Jason's mind like a knot that wouldn't loosen. And Paul, the man who had lied to him with a trembling conscience, had turned himself in. In a late-night confession to authorities, Paul's full statement opened the gates to an investigation that would stretch far beyond their small town. But Jason knew better than to believe it would ever make the news. People like them, people who uncovered too much, rarely made headlines. The system they fought was too good at rewriting the story. The FBI had come and gone, leaving behind vague promises of justice and sealed files that no one would touch again. The dog kennel, the tunnels, the underground chambers, all destroyed, all burned away in what officials called an accident. But Jason had kept a piece of it, a journal, half-burned and stained with time, that contained names, dates, and cryptic phrases. He didn't know what all of it meant, not yet, but he knew someone else would come looking. The group that operated behind closed doors wasn't gone. They were just waiting for the dust to settle before they shifted shape and started again. He wasn't naive. He had learned that evil doesn't die when it's exposed, it adapts. Still, Jason didn't feel like a victim anymore. He had walked into the fire and somehow emerged on the other side, scarred but standing. The nightmare that began the day his son disappeared had ended not with a final confrontation, not with a perfect resolution, but with an understanding that some truths exist in the gray, where good men are forced to make bad choices, and justice is something you fight for, not something that arrives wrapped in a bow. Jason still visited the old yard where Noah had once played, the swing rusted now, the grass overgrown. He talked to his son there, not expecting answers, but needing the connection. He had planted a small tree near the spot where Noah vanished, and each time he saw it grow, he let himself believe that something good could still come from the horror. But just as the wind quieted and he thought, for the briefest second, that the story was done, a single letter arrived at his door. No return address, no postage, just his name written in red ink. Inside was a single photo, grainy, black and white, of Noah standing in front of what looked like a concrete facility with strangers in lab coats behind him. The date on the corner was 5 years after Noah disappeared. Jason stared at the photo for hours, his hands trembling, the old pain roaring back into his chest like a storm. If it was real, and every instinct in him said it was, it meant everything he believed had just shifted again. It meant that maybe his son hadn't died. Maybe he was still out there, hidden by the same people who had built the lies around them. The photo raised more questions than it answered. Who sent it? Why now? And what did it mean that Noah was alive, and possibly not alone? The tree outside rustled in the breeze, and Jason closed his eyes, holding the photo to his chest. He had thought this was the end of the story, but it was only the end of a chapter. Somewhere out there, the next piece was waiting. And Jason knew now, without a doubt, that he would never stop looking. Because once you see the truth, really see it, it never lets you go. It becomes a part of you, a shadow that walks with you into every quiet room, every sleepless night. And as the screen faded to black, the last image lingered, a shot of the photograph, zoomed in, the boy's face blurry but unmistakable, standing at the edge of something much bigger than one man's grief. Below it, one sentence faded in slowly, almost like a whisper: the story never really ends, it just waits for someone else to uncover it.